Hello, all. Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter and Andrei Martyanov. We got lots of things going on we have to talk about. You probably saw my thumbnail, a picture of a skeleton, a skeleton Ukraine with a surrender flag. I think that's the direction we're going. Let's talk. Hello, all. Garland here with Scott and Andrei Martyanov. Before we get going, Scott, I understand you got something big things happening, big things going on with the Russia House. Make sure you let everybody know exactly what your new project is and how they can be a part of it.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. When the war started, I guess when the Ukrainian conflict started, I was approached by Soloviev Live to do a show that turned out being called the Scott Ritter Show. And the purpose of it wasn't to spread Russian propaganda, but rather to give voice to Russian voices and Russian perspectives that were lacking here in the West. Never once did, Soloviev Live helped bring in quality interviews. I mean, I got to interview some very interesting people, high-ranking people, military, politicians, etc. The interview was all mine, my questions, for better or worse. And I think people enjoyed it because it gave them an opportunity to hear Russian voices being questioned by the West in a non-confrontational manner, just to hear out the issue, not to promote the Russian point of view, but to at least make it available so people could say, I heard it, I agree with it, I disagree with it, or I'm going to consider it. But it was a valuable program. Unfortunately, the United States is determined that giving airtime to Russian voices was dangerous to American democracy, especially in the lead up to the presidential election. And in September, the Treasury Department passed new sanctions that targeted individuals and entities, and also created a blanket rule that anybody, Garland, you're aware of this, anybody who does business with a Russian entity that is doing business, up to 50% of their business with these sanctioned individuals becomes sanctioned as well. And so, in the abundance of caution, because as you know, I have the FBI, crawling up my you-know-what, and I'm not going to give them any excuses. And so I contacted Soloviev Live and said, look, if I'm going to continue the Scott Ritter Show, I need to do my due diligence. I need to know what your financial arrangements are to make sure that you don't qualify for this sanction. And initially they were being cooperative, but I guess their lawyers came in and said, no, that's not a good precedent to set to open up our books because the Department of Treasury is curious. So we had to part ways. Not if the sanctions are ever lifted, I'd do it again in a heartbeat with them. But, in the meantime, that Russian voice has been lacking. And if you take a look at what's been going on, they shut down the Scott Ritter Show in September. I can guarantee you that had the Scott Ritter Show still been going, I would have interviewed top Russian strategic thinkers, politicians about the nuclear war threat, about the scare, about what was going on in the fall, the ATACMS attacks, Oreshnik. It would have been some knockout interviews that would have blown people away, given Americans' perspective about what was going on in Russia that was lacking. But I couldn't, because I couldn't do it, and it was a unique program. Nobody else was doing it. And so I said, well, why allow the State Department, Department of Justice, Department of Treasury to basically silence the Russian voice? And that isn't going to happen. So I decided that I was going to set up my own version of the Scott Ritter Show called The Russia House. It's, again, we have to be very careful how we proceed so we don't cause any legal issues. It's done in partnership with a wonderful lady, Alexandra who is the administrator of my Telegram channel. She's been a long time in it, and she also helps out with videos in the lead up to my visits to Russia. She helped make some video shorts, and she was ready to support the big trip when my passport got pulled. But she stepped up, and she and I have formed a partnership. She owns the channel because it has to be that way. I can't have any ownership in it, so I have no problem. My job isn't to make money. My job is to get information out there, and but it is a subscription only service for Telegram because to do the quality we want, and this requires interpreters, etc. There is overhead, and also Alexandra is putting a lot of time into this, so she needs to be compensated for that as well. Plus, we're hoping to build up a little bit of a war chest so that if I get my passport back and I'm able to travel, that we're able to do Russia House events in Russia that are fully paid for. And so we encourage people to subscribe. It's a very reasonable fee. Now, I have to say it's funny. The first episode is up, and it's about drone wars. It's basically I interview a fascinating individual who was a journalist who got involved in building electronic warfare solutions to drones. But the accompanying article called "Game of Drones," talks about drone warfare and what it does, the psychology of killing, and what happens when people come back who are drone operators. What does it how does it work? And these are people who could be, their skill set could be used by terrorists, by criminals, etc. And apparently, the people that monitor subscriptions put a halt to any subscriptions. They're concerned about that article is promoting violence. So, if you want to subscribe, give it a day. We're going to clean this thing up and find out why they're objecting to it and move on. But I'm excited about it. It's we've already got a couple episodes in the can. We'll be interviewing some very fascinating people going forward. And the idea is to not just do another straightforward interview, but to, as you'll see in these interviews, to come at it from a different direction, have a different kind of discussion about some very important topics. But again, to give voice to Russian perspectives that is lacking in the overall debate today. The Russia House with Scott Ritter, Telegram channel.
And just if you want more info on it, go to scottritter.com at the top of his website, and you can learn more. Certainly want to hear, what to do. Well, I think it's a time now that we can do a lot of work to bring the people of our great countries together. Privyet, kak stela, Andrei.
Oh, I'm still alive. That's surprising. It's really good. I mean,
well, let's start here, Andrei. I have some questions, and I'm sure you can help me. And just personal questions, and I'm sure a lot of people. Belarus, in recent months, we've heard that they're getting Areshnik. The Areshnik system will be stationed in Belarus. When the conflict started, the nuclear weapons, they're hosting Russian nuclear weapons. I don't understand the relationship. If you could talk about the relationship between Belarus and Russia, the importance of it, what they mean to Russia, and how they're kind of working together militarily, because I don't understand that much about it.
Darn, you should have Vladimir Trukhan on your show. He knows all about it. I mean, literally all. No, I mean, it's a union state, Russia and Belarus. Obviously, Mr. Lukashenko has his own ideas about how he has to be perceived by the outside world and what has to be done. But no, as a union state, and obviously Vladimir Putin accommodates him to a degree possible, his ambitions, his political ambitions, and he has to sell himself in Belarus too. And there is an issue there of the shakiness of the political system there. So, but yeah, they signed again, this agreement or treaty, if you wish, that Belarus is definitely under Russia's nuclear umbrella. So and it has been stated a long time ago in the doctrines. Now it's just literally like, okay, let's do the triple redundancy. No, let's do quintuple redundancy. Okay, so we are Here we signed another thing and said, now for sure, if something happens, so it's obvious that it is. And there is a definite integration of Belarusian economy, which is significant, but obviously it's nowhere near the size and scale of Russian economy. And inevitably, as they are definitely brotherly people, Belarusians. So yeah, there are Iskanders and their nuclear warheads in Belarus. Per Oreshnik, it doesn't really matter if it is in Belarus or in anywhere. It just covers all of it, and put that thing, God forbids, of course, to Chukotka. It's going to cover pretty much all of the Western United States and parts of their, heartland. So yeah, it's just that Lukashenko rides this, PR wave after this shocking, obviously, impression Oreshnik introduced or produced on the number of people in the West. And so he loves to associate himself like, we are doing this. No, you're not doing this. It's Russia which is doing this. And full command and control of the nuclear weapons are in Moscow and around. Okay. So it's simple as that. But the guy loves to say that, he wants to talk himself up, and it's fine, I think so. It's in no way interferes with the objective process of the unification of the countries, so, and
do you think part of what happened here was, do you think maybe because this is what I thought, when the conflict started, there was some concern that NATO or that Ukraine may try some funny business, shall we say, in Belarus or on the Russian border, and that would have been a threat to Russia, so of course to Belarus, but it could be a threat to Russia also.
Yeah, they were concentrating number of the formation of troops, along the border, and it was the game, so then Belarusians moved their forces. They have not insignificant armed forces, but of course they are not capable of fighting the serious war, so to speak. And so, yeah, it's been all about nerves, but Lukashenko is like Erdogan. He loves his multi-vector, as Russians say, bohato-vectorny, which is meant rich in vectors, So he loves to sit on several chairs simultaneously, okay? So, and only when he almost got removed from power by the so-called opposition forces, this is when he understood, if he wants to survive as a leader and his country to survive as, he has to be next to Vladimir Putin and to Russians. And that's when this, around 2020, then that's when it all happened. And then now it's just inevitable that, yeah, it's basically unified state eventually, with Belarus obviously retaining all of its independence and pretty much most of the aspects, but economically and militarily, the countries are being integrated in full.
Scott, what are your, I know you follow what's happening on the ground. It seems to me that to some extent, as the Trump administration, I'm not going to say drags their feet, maybe that would be the right term, that to some extent, not being in, a rush 24 hours to get this done, seems that the Ukrainians are getting beat the heck up a lot more too. What's happening on the battlefield, and how do you think what's happening now on the battlefield affects the strategies, if that's the right word, involved with the negotiations for ending the conflict?
First of all, there are no negotiations in the conflict right now. So,
or future coming negotiate, whatever you want to say.
There won't be any negotiations in the conflict. The West is living in a fantasy world right now where we somehow believe Russia is going to come to the table. Russia's not coming to the table, not unless Russia sets the table, and Russia defines the menu, and Russia picks the waiters, and Russia directs who's going to do the dishes, and Russia gets to pick the seating chart. This fantasy, you got to be careful with leaks because you never know the accuracy of the leaks or what the motivations are behind the leaks, but it's now been said that Keith Kellogg is going to present the peace plan at the Munich Security Conference, and elements of this peace plan have been leaked to the press. And everybody's just doing backflips. Trump's going to say no NATO to Ukraine. Trump doesn't get a vote. Literally, he doesn't get a vote. The only vote that counts is Putin's vote, and Putin's already voted. He said no NATO. That's it. Trump's not doing Putin any favors by doing this. Putin's already dictated the outcome. And now there's a Crimea is going to be Russian. It's Russian already. Russia's going to get the territories it already occupies. No, Russia gets all of Russia. You don't seem to understand the Russian Constitution if you think otherwise. Mother Russia is Mother Russia. Ukrainian troops will leave all Russian soil, especially Kursk. And what this peacekeeper force? They're talking about there won't be any Americans, but we'll let the British come in. No, you won't. It just isn't going to. This is so fantasy driven, and the notion that Trump holds any leverage over Putin and Russia, that can compel Russia to basically surrender, because the Kellogg-Trump peace plan is a Russian surrender. It's a Russian defeat. It's Russia saying, "Oh, we lost. Therefore, Russia hasn't lost. Russia is winning decisively." We see that on the battlefield. Russia's in a mode right now where this is the thing about a war of attrition. You don't have to make impressive territorial gains if your job is to grind the enemy down to zero. Because eventually, as the closer you get to zero, the enemy will collapse, and then those big gains happen on their own. And this is the direction that Russia is heading. They are winning across the board. I mean, there's no doubt that the Russians are taking some casualties, but don't believe a word coming out of Ukraine about Russian casualties right now. Look, Russia took some heavy hits early on. There's no doubt about that. Everybody acknowledges that Russian columns got overextended, got hit, got ambushed. There was a period of time in the transition from the pre-referendum war and then the mobilization, etc., where Russia undertook some very expensive offensive operations, primarily run by Wagner, but also some stability fighting where they had to do certain things, and the casualties went up. But now, today, the Ukrainians keep throwing these videos out there of Russia's launching suicide attacks across the field. That's not happening. There's no doubt that Russia loses a vehicle here, there, or something like that. But there's no need for Russia to launch a suicide attack anywhere, because they know where the enemy is. They don't need to lose men to close with the enemy to kill the enemy. They can hold back, bring in the FAB, guided bombs, come in with their superior artillery. There's some sort of equilibrium with drones, but eventually the Russians win the drone fight. They are winning the drone fight. And when I talk to Russian journalists, they're saying that the kill ratio today is around 20-1. I mean, that's overwhelming. 20-1 kill ratio. Murat Karalin has said there's days in some of the heaviest fighting where Russia doesn't lose a single person dead. They lose wounded, a lot of wounded. But no, and when Russia's losing dead, it's primarily from drones. Drones are the biggest problem for the Russians. The Ukrainians just have an endless supply of these things, and they're pretty damn good at bringing them onto the battlefield. And so far, the Russians don't have the foolproof solution. So you get into a drone war of attrition that Russia has to hunt down the drone operators, and then create a lull, and then Russia can. But if you take a look, Russia's advancing everywhere. You'll see the propaganda videos. I love the Ukrainians. We're pushed them back in Toretsk. We're pushed them back in Toretsk. Well, Toretsk is falling. I mean, if you're pushing them back, why is it falling? Because the Russians are advancing. Tree line, village, tree line. Slow, methodical advances, slaughtering the Ukrainians as they go. It's war is hell. This is high intensity warfare that's taking place right now. So that means that the Ukrainians are resisting. There's heavy fighting going on, but the notion that Ukraine has any say in what's happening on the battlefield besides death and retreat is ridiculous. Russia is not, and here's the other thing. Russia didn't get to this place by accident. Andrei, I hopefully will back me up on this. Everything that's happening right now is by design, and it happened because the Russians didn't take any shortcuts. Everything that the Russians are doing, from the logistics, sustainability, to command and control, to communications, everything has been planned carefully for Russia to achieve just what they've achieved here. Supremacy across the total line of contact, pushing the Ukrainians back relentlessly. And this happened because of a war of attrition that wore every aspect of Ukrainian resistance down to the nub that it is. The last thing Russia will ever accept is a ceasefire, because a ceasefire means that 2 years of sacrifice is undone that quick, and that's unforgivable. No Russian military commander would advise for a ceasefire. They will all resist this because they have worked too hard to get where they're at. There's no reason why they need to have a pause to let Ukraine get up, rest, re-equip, reorganize, and reset the attrition clock. Russia has the advantage because they've earned this advantage with blood, and they're not going to give it up. And this is why Trump needs to start talking to military commanders who haven't decided that they're political advisors. Keith Kellogg, he at one time was a military commander, but right now he's some guy that's playing in this world of politics where his advice is just stupid. And he's so loose with the facts too. I don't know, Andrei, are you familiar with the paper he wrote back in April?
Not in April.
Make America Great Again, the Ukraine-Russian conflict, where he just basically spouts off in all the anti-Russian propaganda points, etc.
They all do.
That's the foundation of thinking that he's taking into this conversation. So I just think that this war it's over. I mean, it's going to take some time for the collapse to take place, but we are watching the inevitable decline, the irreversible decline of Ukraine, and there's nothing the West can do to prevent this outcome. If Trump wants to save Ukrainian lives, he needs to basically tell Putin, tell me what you want, I'll make it happen, and we're bringing this thing to an end.
Andrei, I have a question for you, but before I do that, did you have any comment on the...
Well, no, Scott covered it very well. And the only number I want to also add here is that actually per field medicine, in terms of wounds, unless we're talking about the mortal wound, which essentially KIA, you basically do not even get it off the battlefield. So it is KIA for all intents and purposes. Return rate is 96% in Russian field. Only 13% of Ukrainian wounded return to the field. That tells you that is why I've been like idiot, like jackass, repeating it ad nauseam for 2.5 years. Take their casualties and don't count them as they killed and wounded. All of it is killed. Simple as that. So, and then suddenly Doug McGregor comes out a few days ago and said, our guys tells 1.2 million killed.
Well,
it's demolition of their unbelievable scale.
Yeah, when the apparently someone asked Dmitry Medvedev, who's has a colorful way with words, and they asked him about peacekeepers. Well, what happens if the French or whatever send some forces? And he says, well, that'll just be more work for our artillerymen.
Yeah, but that's correct. They die.
Can I just quick peacekeeping definition? There's a specific. I mean, it's a thing. It's not just a term. You can't have peacekeepers unless both sides agree to their plan.
Exactly.
If one side doesn't agree, then they are war fighters.
Yeah.
And that's more work for the artillerymen. Now, speaking of which, I want to ask you about this, Andrei. I've been reading a lot recently, a couple of things. Number one, there was one of these, the kidnappers, the people that go around and grab people and throw them in a truck and send them to the front line. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, that's apparently their trucks have been getting blown up. Some of them have been shot. Apparently, there was a large grouping of Ukrainian soldiers that came together in an unfortunate time, and they've got a visit from the business card of Mr. Iskander, and they were eliminated. And the word what I was reading and what I saw was there is, I don't know if it's a partisan group, but apparently there are groups in Ukraine who are either partisan or fighting or on behalf. And now that there are actually Ukrainians who aren't necessarily pro-Russian or whatever, who are fighting the government, apparently there's some internal conflict going on in Ukraine where there are people there either fighting against their own government. They got problems in Ukraine, if you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, they do. And there are occasions on which those TCK guys, the centers for the recruitment, first, there are good news for those guys from those recruitment centers. They are being recruited themselves now. So here we are now. Now that is just, poetic justice for some people who got, basically recruited, quote unquote, which essentially kidnapped. But to understand the ratio, not only just kill ratio. For example, Russian armed forces still get, on the average, between 1,200 to 1,500 volunteers per day. That means 45,000 volunteers each month. Ukraine armed forces get, if they get 1,000 per month, that tells you everything. So, and inevitably, but you know what? At this stage, let's be honest, it's too late. Because essentially, it's too late for them. They can, resist whatever they want, and good for them, but it's too late because at this stage, everything's set in stone, essentially. And Scott beautifully described actually the, and again, the only thing which I have to stress, there is absolutely, the blowing out of any Trump or any other. Well, Keith Kellogg will be looked at as an amateur, by the Russian generals, because Mr. Rybkov, no less, first deputy foreign minister, 2 days ago, comes out and openly states that United States basically started it. They have to make the first step towards the meeting Russian, essentially, the negotiations. Now, as Scott says correctly, there's no negotiations. There are probably Washington bureaucrats calling some departments, trying to arrange some kind of talks, and they say, oh yeah, negotiations go fine. No, they're not going fine. So, and when you have the top of the political level in Moscow, basically, reprimanding Washington for all this BS, with those, what can I say? It's pretty clear. Russians already put forward these requirements since December 2021, essentially, give and take, a little bit here, a little bit there. And the critical phrase which constantly is there and which is being repeated by Russians as ad nauseam, considering the realities on the ground. Realities on the ground, Russian diversionary recon groups are already operating on the western bank of Dnieper. And Russians are already beyond Oskol River, and so Kupiansk is going to be just basically, it is already kind of semi-encircled. So there you go. That's pretty much. Then Kherson and Zaporozhye, and so that's what it is.
Let me ask you this, Scott. I remember there was talk, is Trump going to get out of NATO? Will he back out of NATO? And they were like trying to pass laws to stop Trump from getting out of NATO. I'm looking at it. What's going to be left for him to get out of? I'm looking at NATO, and we've said this for a long time ago, based on just what was based on the fact that NATO was going to be defeated. But there are a lot of other things internally, as Romania now, it looks like they're going to be going in a different direction. It's interesting. We found out that the USAID gave $41.7 million to NGOs for democracy in Georgia. I think that's come to a screeching halt. Let me say this. All of that USAID money, which was propping up NATO, I think NATO's finished. What's left to be gotten out of? Scott, does NATO survive this? And is there anything much left of NATO right now? They're out of weapons. They're out of money. The people in Europe hate their leaders. Is there even anything in NATO? Looks like that skeleton that I have on the thumbnail. Scott.
Let me put it this way. If NATO woke up today and said this Ukraine thing was a horrible mistake, Russia is not a threat to Europe, and that, but Europe can benefit from having a defensive alliance with shared military doctrine, etc. So we want to keep NATO in as a basic infrastructure to allow joint development of doctrine, commonality, etc. Maybe NATO could survive. Maybe. But NATO's taken a completely different track. They're doubling down on stupid in Ukraine, which means they're going to continue to deplete resources and credibility.
They just got 5 or 6 new French Mirage or whatever those stupid fighters are from France. Boy, that's going to turn the table, no doubt.
I think the Russians are planning their surrender right now. I mean, the Mirage 2000 is,
yeah,
the Mirage 2000. That tells you it's 25 years old. But the fact is, NATO has become almost a parody. It's bad comedy. They are talking about a Russian threat that doesn't exist. Look, Andrei and I could sit down together. It would be an interesting intellectual exercise for Andrei and I to sit down and war game out what Russian force structure would have to look like to have viable offensive capability against the Baltics, against Poland, against Romania, all at the same time. Because you can't, because of NATO being what it is, you don't get to say, we're just going to do the Baltics. Understand you're going to be, doing stuff. I just point to this to Ukraine and the significant forces that Russia has deployed for that frontage. Now, imagine that level of high intensity conflict being waged against the Baltics, Poland, down in Romania, etc., and understand the stress this is going to put on Russia's military. Overwhelming stress. Russia's not equipped, organized to carry out large-scale offensive operations against Europe, primarily because Russia doesn't want to carry out large-scale offensive operations against Europe. Now, if Europe attacks Russia and Russia has to mobilize millions of men, different story. But right now, it just isn't. It isn't a realistic threat, and yet NATO is pretending that it is a realistic threat, and they're trying to build up a military capability to respond to that they can't do. They literally can't do it. Germany's supposed to be the economic engine for this. Pistorius, the defense minister, came out and said, we can't do 5%. Because if we do 5%, basically 50% of their budget will be going to the military, and of their available money. So we can't do that. We simply can't. They can't make 2%. And here's the deal: Trump has put the 5% standard out there. Why? Because I think Trump knows they can't make it.
Right.
Trump knows they can't make it. Therefore, and what Trump has said is, then we're out, and it's all on you. And then that's 10% or 15%. They can't, which means NATO has literally talked itself out of existence, and that's where we're at right now. The conditions NATO has created for its future existence are not achievable, not even remotely achievable. And what's going to happen is, because they've gone out on such a limb, the United States is going to withdraw, and that'll bring about the collapse of NATO. The Europeans should have been preparing a more substantive European security framework. They don't have one right now, but watch how quickly they try to cobble one together and how impractical it becomes because of the stupidity of certain nations. And then you're going to see Europe fracture up. You're going to see nations cutting side deals with Russia. I think one of the first nations to cut a side deal is going to be Germany, and they're going to cut a nice, wonderful little side energy deal. And you're going to see other nations do that as well. Romania, Slovakia is already getting their oil in from or their gas in from Turk Stream. Hungary, Serbia, and one by one, the dominoes shall fall until you have the Baltics, Poland, and maybe Great Britain sort of isolated there. Finland and Sweden are going to sit there and go, "What the hell did we do? We got to get out of this thing." They're going to and Garland, you know this because I said it, I think, on your show, you and Wilmer Leon. Back in December of 21, I said every European government that votes for, gets involved in the sanctioning of Russia is going to collapse and fall and be removed. And that's happening. And Macron is next on the list. He says, I'm going to double French military spending. No, he's not. France can't afford it. Europe can't afford any of the spending they're talking about. NATO is a doomed institution. When Mark Rutte became the Secretary General, I wrote an article, and I said that he will be the last Secretary General of NATO, and I firmly believe that. There will not be another Secretary General. Rutte is overseeing an organization that has been fatally injured by Stoltenberg's actions and his actions, and it can't be fixed.
Andrei, did you have a comment on
Yeah,
that?
it's important point because essentially I agree with Scott entirely. I subscribe pretty much to each of his words. But also Mr. Healy, the Secretary for the Defense of United Kingdom, yesterday actually, and Telegraph reported it, and all other UK tabloids. They don't have any other type of press, just all of them, including The Economist and Financial Times. Evidently, Washington already told that from now on, British are responsible for the Ramstein format. And it's just like hammer over the head because, what is Ramstein? It is operational strategic planning of this whole goddamn, adventurism in Ukraine. That's what it is. It was ran by the Lord Austin, Lord Vader, and all kinds of people like Mr. Aguto, the Lieutenant General. I think so. He's probably now a 3-star general after that, after he failed pretty much to achieve anything. So there you go. Mr. Trump, whatever we say about him, and there's a lot to be said about Mr. Trump and about his narcissism, he's extremely sensitive about when some substance begins to hit the fan, And here he is, and it is 16th day. I don't know if he still wants to make this war his own war, but the point is this latest news, and again, it's just like, oh my God. So British are now instructed to hold the bag. Wow. And it's pretty much, that's it. America say, you know what, we're not playing. And guess what? It was British plan and British operation planning in Kursk. Today's tally, 57,838 killed since August 6th in Kursk alone. 337 of those tanks, Abrams, Challengers, Leopards, all burned. They killed British, known for their combined arms operations skills. I'm just joking. I'm screwing with you. They are, these are the guys who planned that. They killed the combined arms army there, literally killed it. It's the charge of the light brigade to the power 10. That's what they did. This is, I am sure they will be teaching this in their, vocational school in Sandhurst, for the, and how not, of course, they will showing how brilliant the planning was and all that, how they gave it, stuck it to Russians, So, and that's what it is. And I was like reading this news, and that's exactly what Scott is talking about. It's like, and they have this ugly mug of this guy, Sam Healy, one of the most disgusting looking personages. He's like from the Nosferatu from 1920s movie, remember? Yeah. So he looks like exactly like that. I mean, and he is defense secretary there,
Let me ask you this, Andrei. Let me ask you this, Andrei, because I've been reading lately that Denmark has been talking to Gazprom, and they're saying, perhaps we could, get some of these gas pipelines going again. And now, no doubt, Russia, I mean, look, money's money. We can all count. Russia's going to sell them gas. But now, and at the same time, apparently there's a new set of sanctions where they're saying we're going to sanction something, a fertilizer, and they need the fertilizer. Yeah. What happens when this thing so-called ends, whatever, and inevitably Western Europe comes crawling back to Russia saying, hey, we want to do business with you again so we can get our industry happening? What do you hear from talking to the people in Russia, being a Russian person, from the perspective that for the last several years, they've been like, you can't read Dostoevsky, you can't have a Russian breed cat. I mean, they hated, you couldn't even put it like an R in you had to say Alinsky because the Z was a terrible thing because it was associated with Russia. Why would the Russians want to do business with these lunatics?
They don't. And Mr. Lavrov, I quote Mr. Lavrov, by the way, which is essentially blew my brains out in when RT reported about his meeting with African ambassadors from Africa, which was very important. And of course, they gave the summary of Mr. Lavrov talking about Russian-African relations, and Russia opens new embassies in African countries. And and they never reported the main thrust of his speech there. And you know what was the main thrust of his speech? The main thrust was that we made a horrendous strategic mistake by turning to the West after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This will never repeat again. It's over. And this was a good lesson for political elites and people of Russia. And guess what? Even before the start of special military operations, you can look it up. Even the, this pro-Western, all the Levada centers, which are U.S. aids, basically CIA-financed organizations. Already then, 64% of Russians didn't consider themselves Europeans. Already then. Today, never in my life did I see so much contempt and disgust, not just towards Europe, but towards Europeans at large. And majority of Russians understand the United States, Russia, and China, this is their highest league. They have to find some kind of the modus vivendi. In terms of Europe, Russians don't want to deal with them at all. Russians have been betrayed by European elites like this colorless. She is the exhibit A of the radical mediocrity. Angela Merkel. Today, she says we cannot allow Russia to win. Well, yeah, sure, you are so profoundly important, for this. And look in Germany. Europe will be poor. It will never be again the first world. And it's already going there. For example, some nations, we have to be very honest about it. And we have the former internal secretary of the internal affairs of United Kingdom speaking to Heritage Foundation. As much as I mock Heritage Foundation because they are pretty much what classic Menkins, morons with the PhDs there. But even she comes out and says that, yeah, J.D. Vance has a point. We may not exist by 2050 as a nation. Same goes for France. They lie about the statistics about what is happening there. But in reality, the south of France is not French anymore. It's Arab, it's black, it's totally non-French. And then, of course, you know what? And we have the situation with Paris, which is, well, everybody knows. There is a term now, is the depression after visiting real Paris. When people begin to see that it is pretty much dirty, stinky, and it's not as glamorous as it is shown. So, and yes, that's the way for the Europe. Russians are not gonna supply cheap energy to them. Period. All this classic old Europe, which is, of course, we know, United Kingdom, Spain, France, Italy, low countries, Germany, it's over. They will be paying what Russia says. If they even get to Russian energy, you know why? Because all contracts are running out, I believe, by 2027. And power of Siberia too is already pretty advanced. All this goes to the Asia and to the Eurasian mass. And so they made their choice. And that's why I am on record. You know what? I like in this particular respect what Trump does. You know why? All pretense have been dropped. There's not this BS, like about human rights, democracy. No. It is all about spheres of influence, and big guys will decide, and the rest of them will be standing in the wings, and they will ask like fathers, founding fathers, what did you give us? Famous, republic if you can keep it, and we say new world order if you can keep it. So that's what is going to be. Does Trump understand this? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I am on record also. While 16 days is a very short term, and he obviously provided a flurry, basically the blizzard of all kinds of things. Some of them good, actually. Some of them I support, obviously, and some even appointments I support. But let's give him about 100 days and see where it all goes. Usually it's first 100 days thing, when people begin to make an assessment, preliminary assessment. So, and I like that we are not in this world anymore about liberal BS, all this crap about, USAID. You know what I enjoyed most of it? It was their transgender opera in Colombia. Just what the hell, people? I mean, this is it's institutionalized insanity. They are laundering money. They always did.
Yeah, Scott. One of the things I enjoyed last week when I watched Tulsi Gabbard in the Senate, I thought back of that Al Capone movie where he came in with the baseball bat and beating people over the head with it. That's the only thing she didn't do. Exactly. Is beat a couple of senators over the head with a baseball bat. But I think she didn't have to. Scott, let me ask you this now. Since we're talking about this, the whole regime change stuff, a place that's close and dear to your heart, Georgia. $41.7 million. And I'm sure that was supposedly on democracy stuff. Guaranteed lots more was spent. But what's interesting is this. The Georgia Dream, even with unlimited money, unlimited all kinds of stuff coming in, they still held their ground. What do you think the spirit's going on in Georgia after all of this? What do we need to know about Georgia after holding off for their democracy?
Well, first of all, the definition of Georgian democracy is it's a very difficult thing to quantify. There's Georgian nationalism, but there's different schools of Georgian nationalism. When Georgia separated itself from the Soviet Union, before the Soviet Union fell, by the way, which sort of made it unconstitutional from the Soviet perspective, but it was headed by a Georgian nationalist, a Mingrelian nationalist, Gamsar Kudia, a poet, who had been oppressed under Soviet rule, etc. But it was Georgian nationalism, not Georgian democracy. And he was immediately opposed by, various elements within Georgia, organized crime, which metastasized into something called the Mechedrioni, with a guy named Usiliani running it.
I think so. It was Usiliani.
The White Eagles. This other militia group came in. There was just a whole bunch of Georgian names that I'll butcher right now if I try to say them. But the bottom line is there was no Georgian democracy. So let's not pretend there was a Georgian democracy. There was Georgian chaos that led to conflict in South Ossetia. That then led to conflict in Abkhazia, then led to a Georgian civil war that ended up with Gamsar Kudia getting popped in the head by Georgian special forces near the end. But there wasn't Georgian democracy. Eduard Shevardnadze came in to take over. It wasn't democracy. It was a dictatorship. Georgia's been struggling with democracy and the concept of democracy. Saakashvili was supposed to be moving in the direction of democracy, but he came to power with something in the West that we called the Rose Revolution. But here's the thing about colored revolutions. It's not democratic. It's imposed by the outside. And that's what everybody needs to understand. And if you want to know the truth about the American approach, we'll transition to Russia real quick. Just recently, there was a very important memorandum that was declassified by under the Freedom of Information Act, written by an American diplomat, last name of Mary. He was the charge d'affaires in the Moscow embassy in 1993, 1994, period. And he wrote a memorandum about what we were doing with Yeltsin. He said, backing Yeltsin, what you're doing is you're destroying democracy in Russia. You're destroying Russia's ability to build democratic institutions, and there will be a long-term cost for this, and there has been. But the whole color revolution, the whole backing our horse means that in doing so, we're destroying the processes that allow a nation to grow democracy from within. We destroyed that in Russia, and Russia's been struggling ever since then to do it because now Russia can't trust democracy, homegrown democracy, because of Western money. The second Western money touches it, they say, "Oh, it's tainted," and it is. Boris Yeltsin was. It's not just the 1996 election that we bought. We bought the 1993 election. We kept. Remember, Yeltsin put tanks in the street and declared war on Parliament. That's not a democratic leader. And then we promoted an election that we thought that he would win, and the opposition won, so it became even more paralyzed afterwards. So we had to suppress Russian democracy. That's what we did in Russia. We suppressed Russian democracy, and we learned from that lesson that if we're going to go in and do color revolutions, we need to control everything. We got Saakashvili in, but then Saakashvili made a huge mistake, the Georgian War. A lot of people don't realize that the other problem about Georgian democracy is there's different constituencies. There's a huge constituency of internally displaced persons. Hundreds of thousands of Georgians who have been evicted from their homes in Abkhazia and South Ossetia are living as refugees within Georgia. And that is a constituency of some political importance. And Saakashvili was trying to bring Abkhazia back into the fold. He was actually involved in very in-depth discussions with Medvedev, who was president at the time. And Medvedev and Saakashvili were talking, and they had a very fruitful discussion, I think, in June of 2008. But then Condi Rice flew in and read Saakashvili the Riot Act and said, "You can't be doing this. We're building you an army, not so you can surrender to the Russians. And if you want these territories back, use your army." Now, she denies saying that, but Saakashvili publicly called her out and said, "You said to go in and you would back me, and you didn't. I went in and we got our asses handed to us, and you didn't do anything." And she's like, "Well, we never really told you to go in now, did we?" But did it, and that destroyed Saakashvili. He began a downward spiral that led to the Georgia Dream coming in 2012. Georgia Dream is headed by is the brainchild of Bidzina Ivanishvili, I believe. A billionaire businessman who came in and has a strategy. And people keep saying it's Putin, Russia. I mean, I love, Georgia's not Russia. No shit. Excuse my language. No kidding. Georgia's not Russia. Nobody says Georgia's Russia. Nobody pretends that Georgia's Russia. Georgia is Georgia. Even the Russians say, no, it's Georgia. We understand that. But Georgia and Russia have historically been friends and have friendly relations and have mutually supporting economies that, yes, during the Soviet Union, but also even now. And Ivanishvili said, Georgia can't be going to the West, but this guy's smarter than the average bear, because you know how he didn't just jump in and say, we got to go align ourselves with Russia, because he knew there was political problems. He was a billionaire who made his money in Russia, has a lot of influence and support in Russia, comes in and now is heading up the Georgia Dream that won the election. So you know what the first thing he did as the prime minister, and then later as president? He passed constitutional amendments that made it a requirement for Georgia to join NATO and the European Union. The man is a genius, because now it's locked in. So now, using it as a starting point, because he knew Georgia would never qualify. First of all, Georgia doesn't qualify for NATO membership because of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So you can say it's in the Constitution. It will never happen. And Georgia will never join the European Union because Georgia isn't part of Europe. Georgia is part of Eurasia. And these are realities that Ivanishvili knew, but he put it in there to appease the Saakashvili Western sycophants. And then they proceeded to build their base. And the Georgia Dream base is based upon conservative family values. If you've been to Georgia, literally, you've seen that scene in The Godfather where Michael goes off to Sicily and he's courting that little Sicilian girl, and he shows him walking, and the whole family's walking behind as the chaperones. Yeah, that's how Georgians, they're old school family values. They're not perfect. No nation's perfect. Georgian family values are traditional family values, and Georgia Dream built on that. They built on not this allure of the West, the addiction of the West. Because what happened with Georgians after losing 2008 because of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, many Georgians started to act like Russians in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. A lot of Russians learned to hate Russia and say, no, we want to be like the West. The West is our model. The West is our ideal. And they forgot what it meant to be a Russian. And many Georgians went, the West is our model. European Union is our model. And they forgot what it meant to be Georgian. Georgian Dream never forgot what it meant to be Georgian. And they built this base, this political base. And then they were very, very clever. They monitored everything that happened. They were watching as USAID funds filtered through the National Endowment for Democracy, and then the Democratic arm, the Republican arm, the Labor arm, because, NED has all these political arms related to the unions, and they're all in there doing their thing. Right now people talk about the $41.7 million. Garland, this wasn't a secret. I wrote an article about it last year, just going on USAID's website and taking out their contracts, going to NED and taking out the contracts and parsing the contracts out. And the strategy was very clear. They were undermining Georgia Dream. In order to do that, they were going in and they'd start at the grassroots level. Diversity. Diversity is their thing. So they come in, the first thing they say is, we have to have diversification at the local level, and the money will encourage diversification. That means empowerment of non-traditional values, homosexuality, transgendered, things of that nature. You empower them, and then you move up and you say, now we politically organize, and they put money in to organize these non-traditional values into politically viable constituencies, and then they come up and they start attacking we have to have a war against disinformation. And so now we put in, media. We have to build media. We build press and all this stuff. They own all the independent media. And then the war against disinformation. So the only voice that can be heard is this so-called independent media. And then they hold elections that are from the ground up, not from the top down. And the idea is that you topple the power by pushing up and in. That was the plan. Georgia Dream knew it. They are the most clever people in the world. They did a dry run of a Foreign Agent Registration Act. Most people who were watching that went, oh, God, look, Georgia Dream overextended itself. They put that law out there and then they backed down. Nope, that's called a reconnaissance in force. They put the law out there and they went, let's see how you react. And they watched everybody blow up. And they just sat there and they took notes. Who did this? Who did that? Who did this? Then they turned their investigation on them, found out who took the money, and they built a plan of action. They came back with a revised law, but before they put the law in, they counted the votes. Remember, they always talked about, Lyndon Johnson when he was in the House and in the Senate, counted votes. He never did anything until he had the votes lined up. Georgia Dream got the votes locked in, not just enough to pass the legislation, but to overturn a veto. And once they had that done, they put the law out there. They exposed everybody. They passed the law. The president vetoed it. They slammed the veto. They moved forward carefully, responsibly, constitutionally, and they won the election fair and free. The only interference taking place in the Georgian election last year was the $41 million the United States used to try and buy an election. The Russians didn't put any money into that election. Russia didn't need to because Georgia Dream had its act together. They are the most squared away people. There is no panic in the Georgian government. Look at their prime minister speak. The man is in 100% control of the situation. And I don't know if you saw what the Georgians just did. They have a solid parliamentarian majority. 49 of these opposition parliamentarians decided they were going to boycott and they were going to, not participate. And they just lost their mandates. Basically, they were kicked out of parliament and Georgia Dream gets those votes. So now they're even stronger. Georgia Dream is rock solid, not going anywhere. And they saved Georgia in the process. In the 2 years that Europe's gone downhill with the sanctioning of Russia, Georgia's economy has grown 9, 10, 11%. This year, they're looking at 9.8% growth. That's amazing. That's amazing. Some of the largest growth in the world. This is because Georgia Dream has taken a responsible thing, and they've done it right. Now, it's not Georgia Dream that's backing out of the relationship. The United States stopped all military assistance to Georgia. That means the United States has broke the contract. That means that Georgia now can say, you broke the contract. We don't need NATO. We can't do NATO. NATO quit us. And the same thing with the European Union. They're sanctioning. The United States is sanctioning. And eventually what's going to happen is Georgia, they've already frozen their talks to join the European Union, frozen until 2028, I believe. When 2028 comes along, there will be a constitutional amendment, and they're going to reverse the things that Ivanishvili put back in 2012 and say, no, we no longer have to be EU and NATO, and then Georgia's going to join BRICS. And that's what we got. Georgia normalizing relations with Russia, joining BRICS. They may never get South Ossetia back. That's a tough cookie. Abkhazia, there's some games being played in Abkhazia right now, and I think Abkhazia is going to come back to Georgia, and my wife's going to be able to go home to Sukhumi, in the next 10 years, and that'll make her very, very happy. Garland, you're muted.
Andrei, something I wanted to ask you. One more prediction. This is a prediction I'm going to make.
Oh, no.
Well, I'm going to give you one quick prediction.
Yeah, please do predictions.
That as Russia and China and ultimately even the Black Rocks of the world start turning towards the global South, and they start building in Russia, they start building in Africa and the Middle East, a bunch of those Africans and Middle Easterns are going to leave Europe and go back home because there'll be jobs there where they're building, and Europe is going to be the one falling fit. I will bet you that. But something I wanted to get to, Andrei, because we only got a few minutes. I don't want to keep you guys here forever. I did want to say this. Nobody's going to want to be in Europe. Everybody, I don't know if you've been looking at the UK. People get the hell out of the UK. All of the money's leaving. The UK is being abandoned. But let's get to this. Andrei, the countries along the border of Russia, yeah, you got Romania, you got Slovakia and et cetera, and then you got the crazies in the Baltic states. When this thing as NATO falls apart, as this thing crumbles, as this conflict resolves, what is the future as far as these countries, these former Soviet states? It seems like there's a block. I won't call it a pro-Russian block. I'll call it an independent-minded thinking block. The Slovakias, the Hungaries, looks like maybe Czechoslovakia, maybe Austria, maybe Romania is moving in that direction. The future of the countries along the Russian border and their relationship with Russia.
Difficult to say. Russia doesn't need them per se, other than the market. So there could be some pro-Russian sentiment as it exists to a degree in Slovakia. The rest of it, they're not, Russophiles, to put it mildly. In most of the cases, the majority of the population doesn't like Russians at all. So, and Russians do not even pretend that they need this love or admiration. But yeah, if it's some kind of working relations, that's fine, So business is business, money is money, so let's do business. So this is in respect to those countries. And Scott also very well suggested this, which is obviously is the part of the parcel between, for example, like Russia and Georgia. If you look, Abkhazia is definitely in play here as the first. Abkhazia cannot exist on its own, period. It's just absolutely ungovernable. It's utterly corrupt, and so and in this case, Abkhazia could be in play, with Georgia, and most likely it is already. And so, but other than that, Russia doesn't need territories. Russia doesn't need people other than those Europeans for whom the new programs have been opened. And these are what is called listen, they change them all the time, but this is traditional Christian, people, primarily from Europe. They are welcomed with their open arms, and many Americans, Canadians, Germans, and French are migrating to Russia. So, and Russia will gladly accept them, and they will become a very, big contributors to Russian culture, traditionally always, pretty cosmopolitan. And other than that, who knows? Who knows what is going to be? But once NATO goes, EU is essentially a economic manifestation of NATO. So probably it will break up also, because in the end, as was correctly stated, and you stated correctly, UK, you go beyond London, and even London, for the most part, some touristy places. It's dirty, it's filthy, it's just, and it's poor. They will be poor. Europeans will be poor. They're already becoming poor, and
will they chop up Ukraine, do you think? Does Hungary come in? Does Poland come in? Do they start trying to grab pieces of Ukraine and reclaim territories that they had?
About that, many people didn't even report on that. Mr. Narishkin, the chief of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, the permanent member of the Security Council, very good buddy with Mr. Putin, because they are all from the same organization, essentially, from the same graduation of the Red Banner Andropov Institute. He already stated a week ago that, yes, we will gather together in Moscow historians from Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, to make an assessment based on the historic documents and historic, archives of what essentially Ukraine is, and who owns and who owned what in Ukraine. Can you imagine? Poles will be just running, right down, so, and not on Poles. Bukovina is essentially a Romanian part of, and of course we have the Hungarian minority, essentially enclave in the Carpathian Mountains. So yeah, there's a lot to talk. But what is the most sensational? The man with the enormous stature and weight in Russian politics officially goes on record. That means what? It was sanctioned from the above. And can you imagine Polish historians coming to Moscow? Wow! Poles come to Moscow to discuss, what kind of Ukraine, what part of Ukraine they think it belongs to them. And we know
Transnistria. Transnistria, does Russia take a chunk to get up? What's happening?
Yeah, Transnistria goes nowhere. But primarily Romania obviously has claims on Moldova, and it's kind of like, But in terms of Bukovina, that's definitely, they have a Romanian enclave there, and so they were historically there for long centuries. So, and this is what hasn't been reported, but these are huge news. Okay, so.
Well, I think we've had a number, several Ukrainian high-ranking officials make comments that ended something about Ukraine may soon cease to exist. And a lot of people just thought they were talking about a military defeat. It sounds to me that when they said Ukraine may soon cease to exist, they may have been talking about the fact that Russia's going to take what it wants, and other people are going to come in, and it may cease to exist because all of the borders might just get redrawn, and everyone
but first Russians will have to deal with the issue of denazification, and if any part of Ukraine remains, what is going to be? It's certainly going to be anchored at Kiev, so there are some kind of, other than that, well, Mr. Putin loves to use this word, Malorossian. That's president of Russia, and who am I to challenge him on that issue?
All right, we're going to get out. But before we go, Scott, it's important that you remind people about your Russia House and let them know. You can go to scottritter.com to find out about Scott's new project, Russia House. Briefly, real quick, let everyone know again on the way out, because I think it's very important. It's critical that we do things to try to bring the people of not just the U.S., but throughout the West to get an understanding about the Russian people. Scott, your new project.
Well, I think if we just take a look at the conversation we had here tonight, we touched on a whole bunch of issues that are important to an American audience. Imagine if we could bring in Russian voices that could, instead of us speculating or giving our interpretation of what to say, ask the question straight to a Russian who is plugged in, who is knowledgeable, who understands, and to hear the Russian voice, to hear the Russian perspective, how invaluable that would be. And that's what I'm trying to do with the Russia House, is to do just that, to have these kind of conversations, but with the players on the ground. And I think it's especially important now because we're in a period of transition. And the United States and Russia are going to be redefining their relationship going forward. There's no guaranteed outcome that this is going to be all good or whatever. But the American people need to have a foundation of fact-based knowledge and information about Russia so they can determine, you know, are they happy with this policy? We have to hold our elected representatives accountable, and we do that best when we're an informed citizenry. So if you go to scottritter.com, you can go and read the Substack article I wrote today about the Russia House. It's a Telegram channel, a subscription-based service, and any support you can provide would be greatly appreciated. Can I just throw something else out there?
Sure, go ahead.
When I came back from Russia last January, I'd been to Crimea and I met with the governor of Crimea, and we talked about, you know, a number of things. And one of the things we talked about was post-conflict, you know, reconciliation and how this gets resolved. And at that point in time, I brainstormed an idea to come up with a Yalta 2. We have the 80th anniversary of the Yalta Conference, you know, taking place this month, actually. And I wrote up a position paper and sent it to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs about creating a Yalta Conference to talk about, you know, post-conflict reconciliation, legal issues of, you know, the new international order and all that. And we were moving forward with this dialogue when my passport was seized and I wasn't allowed to go back to Russia. And I thought that project was dead, you know, because it, you know, well, I just got an email from the Russians. The project happened. They are having this conference in Crimea in March, and I've been invited to go speak. So it's pretty exciting. I don't know if I'll be able to go. I don't have my passport back yet. But the point is, now's the time for this kind of discussion, this dialogue. There's never been a more important time than right now. And the Russia House project supports this kind of dialogue. It's exactly what it's designed to promote. And again, it can't be successful unless it has support. And so if people out there think these are the kind of things that are useful, support the project.
Awesome.
And I think you're the support that is provided.
Awesome. Everybody go to scottritter.com for more information and to keep up with all of Scott's good work. Andrei Martyanov, Reminiscence of the Future is his blog. Also Smoothie X12, that is his YouTube
subscription, $2.99 a minute. So
there we go.
That's why I'm taking my baby, because I spend all the extra money on smoothie.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, join. I think hopefully there's a join button here or on my main page. I think you have to hit videos or more or something. I don't know, but the join button's there. If you can join, that's great. Share this. This is a very important stream. People need to hear these kinds of streams. So share this on all your social media platforms, X, you name it. Everybody there. So we got 1,578 people. There should be 1,578 shares, posts on X and YouTube and everything, so that people can see this and learn more, get more information. Thanks a lot, guys. We're out.
Bye-bye.